So I'm the water projects coordinator that's water quality issues writ large for the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. I've been doing this work now for 23 years. I came up as a recent master's graduate student from the University of Kansas, and was really thrilled to be offered this position because I felt it really aligned with my values and certainly the skills that I had worked to learn as a graduate student in aquatic ecology. And the first several years of my work with the band was very much focused on waters of the reservation. Fond du Lac is one of about 50 tribes nationwide that has federally approved water quality standards. It's through a process called treatment as an affected state. It is a delegated series of authorities under the Clean Water Act that essentially the tribe needs to make a legal demonstration that they can take this on the same way that a state manages its delegated authorities under the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act. But I would also say that I can't really talk about environmental justice issues working for the band without making sure that everybody at least is somewhat familiar with the treaties and with ceded territories, because so much of my work has gone from being just on the reservation and reservation waters to outside the reservation, within our watershed, within our ceded territories. The treaties that were signed with the federal government back in the 1800s, in 1837, 1842, 1854, many others, those are just ones that I'm particularly familiar with. The tribes that signed those retained in perpetuity the rights to hunt, fish, and gather the natural resources and to avail themselves of the cultural resources within these vast areas of land that were ceded to the federal government. And those rights have been, in many cases, upheld all the way to the Supreme Court. And the way that tribal members seek to exercise their treaty rights is based upon an understanding that there will be healthy, sustainable ecosystems and resources available. The reason that the tribal leaders 150 years ago had the foresight and wisdom to retain those rights, and why the federal government also signed off on that, was the recognition that tribal lifeways could not be sustained simply with the reservations that were contained within the boundaries of the reservation. So I would just say from the very beginning, my work has focused on important resources like monomen, wild rice, like being able to eat fish safely without restriction, which gets into the idea of environmental toxics, like in this case, primarily mercury, and to try to ensure that the environmental quality and the ecosystem function is preserved so that tribal members can exercise treaty rights and traditional lifeways, and for future generations. So that's kind of a big picture overview of my work. It's mostly as a scientist, but in support of and in defense of legal rights.
Thank you so much, Nancy. Next we have Leah Foushee, excuse me. Foushee, excuse me. Thank you.
I'm the Environmental Justice Director for the North American Water Office. We founded the Water Office in 1982 out of a trifecta of movements, if you will. The Black Hills Alliance, the No Nukes movement, and the General Assembly to stop the power line across west central Minnesota. The Black Hills Alliance was trying to stop 57 multinational corporations from turning the sacred Black Hills into a national sacrifice zone. And of course, the No Nukes movement was trying to stop nuclear power proliferation after they blew up 3 Mile Island. And the West Central Minnesota power line was an effort to stop large coal-fired power plants, fossil fuels, if you will, from destroying the prairie in North Dakota, where I was living at the time, turn that power into electricity and ship it across North Dakota into Minnesota down by Delano. Now all hell broke out over that particular protest movement. Towers went down in the night, insulators were shot out. Nobody died. A lot of people got arrested. But renewable energy is an alternative, and they wouldn't have had to do those things if they would have just thought better of what we need to survive on this planet. So the Water Office has dealt with many, many environmental projects throughout our now almost 40 years of history, including working with Nancy Schultz on wild rice and mercury contamination. And she's very, very right in everything that she says. But the problem we've been having is that the state agencies lie about what they're doing and who they're doing it for. And the consequences always ends up on the indigenous people. And they say that straight up in their environmental impact statements. That's really, really a problem. I mean, we have people out on the Enbridge Line 3 line route right now, sitting in trees, sitting in spiritual camps, trying to save the water and the rice and the fish. And I don't know what else to say to you about all of that. It's suicide. It's a suicidal run to stop the corporations, because I don't think they really care. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's moving words. Thank you. Let's hear from, oh, and I should mention to the surface processes students that we will be having essay questions based on our discussion today, and so we do encourage you to take notes with what the speakers are saying. So moving on to Dr. Katre.
Thank you. Bit of my introduction and work here. My work in environmental justice has come about in a roundabout way, I would say. One of my interest areas has been around looking at sustainable development goals 7 and 8 particularly, and in developing countries. So my focus has been in South Asian countries, and it's very interesting to see how, there are some connections that are coming about with particularly the tribal nations and tribal communities. As I got into doing work, field work in India, and looking at issues of energy access, because I don't know how many of us know, but we still have, technically about 300 million people who don't have affordable and reliable access to energy in these communities, despite the fact that, in 2019, government of India announced that, India is 100% electrified. In reality, that's not the case. So as I started looking and exploring issues on, what kinds of communities are lacking access, and particularly then what kind of models are emerging that are showing, sustained access and breakthroughs. In that entire process, a lot of the communities I've studied and gotten close to are the tribal communities and the tribal belt in sort of the central part of the country, in India particularly. So if you look at the issues that are surfacing over there, and to make sure that communities have sustained access to energy, and now also if you look at the issues of food security, energy security, and water security kinds of things, what's surfacing from all the work in these communities is really around the notion that a lot of it has to do with institutions and governance. If you look at environmental justice, a lot of it has stemmed from the developed world and Western thinking, and it focuses a lot on issues of pollution, issues of toxic waste, and those kinds of things. But when you look at developing countries and particularly rural communities, my interest is in rural communities, and within that too, a specialized focus on sort of the last mile in rural communities that tends to have its own set of challenges. So if you look at those communities, then these issues, yes, obviously anything that happens around, pollution and toxic waste, or, preservation, conservation of the natural systems and natural resources is an issue, no doubt. But the larger issue in these communities tends, when it comes to environmental justice, boils down to the issues of institutions, whether it's lack of institutions or proper functioning of institutions, the power that resides, within the sort of informal institutions, and comparison of power that resides in the communities, and also the topic of governance, and how does governance happen in these remote and rural communities. Often the dynamics of power and governance it's fascinating field of study, because everybody has good intentions to solve these problems. So nobody is starting with really malintentions, but things start to fall apart if you don't have the right processes involved in terms of whether it's the public sector, private sector, the nonprofit sector and civic sector coming together to solve issues that the communities face, and honoring and respecting the local culture, honoring and respecting the knowledge that these communities have about the local resources, and their importance they give to those resources, and not bringing in solutions externally. And often whether it's the political systems, or you have sort of the private sector that comes in with predetermined solutions, or you have even technology, people with technical capabilities coming in and saying this is the best technical solution. And what happens, it's really about figuring out how to get communities at the center of this process. And I know, John, I think you mentioned in the opening that it's about people. And I see that a lot, come out here in terms of it's not about the technology, and, it's about the people and how you can get people, the communities at the center of the conversation. So, I think I've looked at sort of different kinds of cases, particularly when renewable energy solutions are being brought in, which are important. And from a justice perspective, for the communities, you do need that sustained access. But if you bring in and thrust solutions that don't really meet the needs of the community, then they don't tend to sustain beyond a certain point. And a lot of investments go waste, and the skepticism in the community tends to increase over time with failed solutions. So I think, it's kind of my focus on environmental justice, you will hear, is a lot more around institutions and governance coming from that perspective. So I'll pause here and then, talk more later.
Thank you so much, Katre. Thanks for that perspective. That was really important. Dr. K.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I want to start by just underlining Dr. Katre's point about the need to take seriously, dovetailing on John's agenda setting, the need to take seriously people and people's experiences and people's ability to to know what solutions are best in their own communities and in their own lives, and that whether we're social scientists or policymakers or ecological engineers, from here in Minnesota, it's all too tempting to sit within a comfortable Eurocentric perspective and to to frame issues as being technical problems, that can be solved by the private sector if only it can get our technical workarounds to the communities in need more efficiently. And I think as Dr. Katre said, there's good intentions behind all of that, but we need a more critical perspective to do a better job of just the very simple task of listening to people who are there, which is, by the way, something that, looking at Nancy Schultz's work and Leo Foushee's work, we clearly need to be doing very close to home as well. So my background is in comparative urbanization, and specifically looking at how cities around the world are working on environmental challenges. And then as a framing thing, taking experiences and innovations, not just from the so-called global South, but from the grassroots community level of the global South, seriously as theory-producing sites that hold really valuable lessons for people everywhere, including and especially where we are right here. So, I did many years of fieldwork in Beijing, where right now the Sustainable Development Goals, and we often say SDG, and it sounds like this one thing, but I just want to highlight those two different words, sustainable and development, and remind everyone that those are two different projects, and ask which of those words, in the SDGs is enabling the other. So in Beijing, what we've seen is the justification of environmental crisis being an opportunity for the government to institute some really top-down solutions that have displaced almost 1 million people from the city in the name of resilience, in the name of ecological carrying capacity, in the name of technical thinking, on the basis of water scarcity, and frighteningly, those same sorts of things can happen here. But if we look at grassroots solutions, and take seriously those experiences of community people, then we can see a broader set of policy solutions. So thinking really locally, in Minnesota, some stuff I'm working on, and also with classes this next semester in urban ecology and urban planning next semester, are just rethinking Duluth's green spaces as sites that are for more than recreational purposes, and the ways that they can be rethought around community needs to do with food security and housing insecurity. And right now, Northland's chapter of AIM is trying to build emergency housing, to build yurts that, this is an EJ issue. What kind of access do people have to environments that keep them alive and safe? And are playing tug of war with the city to try to implement, this ground up solution. So yeah, I'll pause there.
Thanks so much, Dr. K. Let's finish up with Kaija.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So my name is Kaija. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a junior at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. I'm studying psychology and Latin American studies, and I also work for the Office of Sustainability. So I think this year, definitely as 2020 has catalyzed the need for environmental justice around the globe, and we've seen that with the pandemic and the inequalities that people are facing, especially in marginalized communities, as well as the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many other Black people. It's catalyzed a lot of need for change and room for change in society, I think. So this semester especially, I've been focused on writing articles for the Office of Sustainability, and I started doing a lot of research and learning and listening and kind of sharing what I'm learning through those articles. And our topics have been on privilege and sustainability, and how the movement as a whole has largely only centered white voices. And it's left out a lot of the grassroots organizations and activists that the other panelists have been talking about, and the important work that they've been doing. We've also started talking more about the environmental justice movement as a whole, as well as the inequalities and the racism that still exists in a lot of our sustainability movements. And we've brought it also to a global stage, talking about climate justice and how the climate crisis disproportionately affects countries and communities around the globe. And kind of through this semester, what I've started to realize is that environmental justice, it's a journey without an end point. And so it's just a continuation of learning and listening and having conversations with your friends, your family, and your peers. And so I'm really excited to be here today and to continue gaining some new perspectives from the rest of the great panelists.
Wonderful, so well said. Thank you so much. We're at 10:25, so I'm gonna kind of combine a couple questions here for the panelists, asking about the most pressing, current, and specific problems or challenges that you see related to environmental justice, and then combine that with potential solutions that you see. And if you see a role for scientists in those, looking at those problems, it would be great to bring that in for our environmental science and geological sciences majors. So Nancy, you want to start us off?
Sure. So having listened to the rest of the panelists, I'm trying to make sure that I come back around and say some of the things that I missed the first time. Yes, I believe there's a role for science. I've always believed that, and I thought that science should prevail in decision making when you're looking at environmental issues and whether a copper nickel mine should be permitted or an expansion on a tailings basin for a taconite mine should be expanded. I've also been a believer in the rule of law, and I believed that having regulatory authorities under the Clean Water Act and having the jurisdiction to protect the waters of the reservation from upstream pollution, I thought that those would all be incredibly powerful tools to enable the Fond du Lac community to protect and preserve natural resources. And it's not enough, because the institutional pressures and the regulatory capture of our agencies by industry is deeper and broader and stronger than I ever cared to admit. We have brought sound, unbiased science to bear in environmental review. We have brought sound legal rationales for into permitting decisions and have been ignored every step of the way, and find ourselves as a last recourse in the courts over things like polymet permits, U.S. Steel Mintac permits. We find ourselves striking legal agreements with Enbridge for pipelines that have existed across the reservation for 40, 50 years that were allowed to be put there by a federal government that was patronizing and did not have the tribe's interests in heart. Those right-of-ways were granted before the tribes had a voice to exercise. And what I'm telling you today is even having a voice, even having capacity, having regulatory authorities, inherent sovereign authorities, and good science and dedicated staff that is, the equal of our peers in state and federal agencies, it's not enough. The system is gamed against what for the tribal community is existential, and that's the preservation of water and the resources that our community is dependent upon. It sounds really bleak, but it's the truth as I see it.
It's really important to acknowledge that reality and for people to understand why the Native American groups are so vocal, right, when they're not being listened to, right? Thank you. Yeah, would you like to add to that?
Oh, it's called genocide and theft of the land. The corporations and the government. I mean, if you haven't noticed, we're sort of in a fascist state right now. And all bets might be off because the military, they're still in the 45's pocket, if you will. And he's a crazy individual. And they don't care if indigenous people survive. They simply don't. They want us to be invisible. Invisible. That's why the law doesn't work. That's why none of the things Nancy so eloquently identified. That's why none of it matters. It does not matter. They will roll over us with a truck, with a tank. They did it at Standing Rock, and they're poised to do it again. They don't care about the wild rice. Not one lick. That's food. That's like the buffalo slaughter in the West. The wild rice is the new buffalo. And if they can get rid of the heart and soul of Anishinaabe people, that is the key. That is the key to get rid of the rice. And they're working really hard on it with the mining, with the oil pipelines, and everything else. And not to forget climate chaos. Climate chaos, if you put all those pieces together, it comes up with death and death and death. It kills the fish, it kills the rice, it kills the trees, it acidifies the soil all over again.
I completely agree, and I think that often our Western culture doesn't see the big picture, right? Jim Rock is a Native American physicist at UMD, and he's so good at bringing in the bigger picture of how Native Americans see the world as a whole. So they wouldn't consider doing things that may be good for the economy, but bad for the environment, the way that these things have happened. And yeah, well, we need to move on, unfortunately, because we're running out of time, but thank you so much. Let's
one more thing,
yes,
if I may.
absolutely.
The first principle of environmental justice is that the earth is sacred, and nobody focuses on that. It's all about the stuff.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Thank you so much. Let's see, Dr. Katre.
Sure. I always have been looking at how to connect the dots between, what I see in one part of the world with where I live right now. And, it's always like, if you have somebody sneeze like 10,000 miles away, it sure has an impact in other parts, right? So, and I don't have all my thoughts sort of, clear at any point. They're evolving. What I do see is the most, working so much in South Asia right now, what I see is some of the most pressing issues at this time and solutions both kind of combined, and where scientists, fit in this scheme of things is, there is a big need for development and sustainable development. I really liked how, Professor K put it in terms of these are two different things, and, but both have to happen at the same time. So as I look at, communities, rural communities, and that are kind of small scale, but there are many, many, many in number. So the solution, whatever you design, has to really scale at a rapid rate. If at all, you have to address development issues. And the solutions have to be sustainable, so they actually are viable in the long run. Otherwise you see a solution in a community, and 5 years down the road, you go and see, and there are so many unintended consequences of the solution that you're hesitant to then replicate that solution. So they have to be sustainable, and they have to be done at a scale. At the same time, we know that these solutions cannot be one size fits all. You have to look at them community by community. So this is a complex challenge that you have to work on. And I think if I look at the meta level of the issues, I think about it as, more often than what we know what needs to get done in a community. And we also know why, it needs to get done. So simple thing would be, let's say that, a community, we do need to look at the issues that are at the intersection of food, energy, water, or just energy access. And we know that more and more renewable energies need to take place. There's no point getting in carbon-based energies, right? So we know what needs to get done and why it needs to happen. The crucial part that is really missing is how. How does that happen? And yes, we have top-down approaches that come from policy-based. And often when we think about top-down approaches, we have all these silos. There is a silo for food, there is a silo for energy, silo for water. And they really hit the community when it comes to the nexus of these issues, which is what the communities care about, because they're not looking at one excellent solution and trading off on the other side when it comes to water quality, for example, right? So the point is, top-down, there are, policies are important, they need to be in place, but at the same time, they operate in silo and communities are affected. So that how really needs to take care of that issue. The second thing I would say is that if you look at bottom-up approaches, grassroots up approaches, the question is, they work in one community, will they work in another community? So how do we scale them? And I think what I'm finding when I've done a lot of comparative studies of, several villages, whether it comes to solar microgrid implementations in communities for, full village energy solutions, including for productive use in these communities. So there is livelihood coming from there, and not just access to energy for basic thing, at home, but really also having economic activity around it. So if you look at these things, then the question is, there's a clear role to be played by what I call as meso-level organizations, sort of the middle tier. And this is in terms of, often they are community development organizations that have a stake and have been with the communities for decades. So they truly understand the culture, the values, everything, and they're totally aligned. And every time I've seen successful cases, these organizations have played a crucial role in balancing the power dynamics between top-down and bottom-up, in actually balancing and saying what kind of technical solutions make sense in the communities. So the key point becomes, how do you empower meso-level organizations? How do you make sure that, the other thing I've found in my research across communities is, it's really this sort of, interesting accountability and responsibility dynamic that needs to come between, often there are, public, private, nonprofit, and civic society. Everybody's involved in these solutions. So how do you ensure there is good balance between accountabilities and responsibilities to make that happen? And then figuring those and, finding some kind of scalable approach around it. But I think for me, it's really the how part. And that's why I keep thinking about these as socio-technical systems. So scientists paired with social scientists is so important in getting these things to work. And it's not one or the other extreme that actually works. If you leave out one, the systems actually fail pretty rapidly if you don't have that in place. That's what my research is kind of showing here. And if someone is interested, I can go into more details, but I just want to make sure that I can use limited time here. I'm pretty passionate about this topic. And when it comes to livelihood, because I've seen in communities where, just one final point, I'm seeing in these communities that because of environmental issues, it's almost like a generation is getting wiped off in these communities. And therefore, finding right solutions is so important.
It looks like Dr. Gallup might have frozen. Are you back? Well, thank you so much, Dr. Katre. Can we move on to Dr. K?
Absolutely. I really like Dr. Katre's framing of these.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my internet's a little unstable. So thank you, Dr. Gran.
So I love this framing of, the need for coupled socio-scientific solutions. And when, Nancy Schultz was talking about all of the lining up this, massive amount of scientific evidence to try to make a point and then having it come to nothing, it's just so illustrative of the fact that science and this process that we love, the scientific process that can, test hypotheses and generate evidence, is only as good when it's being, in terms of actionable evidence, is only as good as the society and the ideology that it's interacting with. And I think that, like Leah said it best, that it's the society we're living in right now has a really specific and relatively narrow Eurocentric conception of what science should be for, and what kind of knowledge counts, and what kind of knowledge gets taken seriously. That leads to, when it comes to trying to set policy, just some really objectively silly bad outcomes, like setting that when the EPA is calculating the amount of mercury that can be in fish, setting that on the basis of a suburban lifeway instead of a subsistence lifeway. The science was right. They measured the mercury right. They got the concentrations right, but the context was missing. And so on this question of what can environmental scientists be doing better, be critical, be self-reflexive. Remember that science is great, but it's not magic. It's not perfect. It's not objective, and it exists in a society. And there's all of these messy connections that, whether or not your boss or your organization is taking them seriously, you as individuals always need to press yourselves to do.
Really great point. Thank you very much. Kaija.
I think all the panelists have made really, really good points. And I think it can just be summarized that systematically our governments and corporations put profit over people's lives. And like we said in the beginning of this panel, that this is about people at the end of the day. And so globally we have governments and corporations taking indigenous land, taking resources, and taking lives, all for profit. And so to fix this entire system will take a lot of individuals demanding change in collective groups, I think, which is why it's so important to support these grassroots efforts on the community levels. Because at the end of the day, like Dr. Katre said, these are the people in their communities who know the issue and they have solutions. So it's empowering and supporting those people and for those solutions. And I think this issue, it can be difficult and a bit disempowering at times, because the people making these decisions are the people in power. And so for individuals as students especially, I think one thing we can all do is vote for better representation for people who put our community lands and our lives, and they promote environmental justice and take that into consideration with their policies. If you're a student and you're really interested in environmental justice or making these connections, there's a lot of great resources on campus, I think, in terms of student clubs. UMD has a lot of student clubs with a lot of diverse programs and voices that you can join and contribute to. I think there's also research opportunities on campus that you can be a part of, and you can help make some of these intersections in our community and in our campus. And finally, one thing I'd just say for students is, during this next semester, when we're starting to register for classes, consider taking a class or two, if you have room, that's outside of your field or study, that's not your major or minor. I know one class that I took a few semesters ago was Voices of African Women. I didn't need to take the class, but I took it anyway because it was definitely out of my comfort zone and out of my knowledge level. And that class was one of my favorite ones because it challenged me on so many levels with sustainability and feminism and grassroots organizations. and especially this Eurocentric view and this westernized perspective and how it can't be applied to other people.
Thank you so much, Kaija, and thank you for bringing it back around to what students can do. And I really love this idea of taking classes and reaching out, and even in the community, to things that are outside of your comfort zone. Wonderful, really wonderful words. So I would like to open it up for questions. We've got just a few minutes left. We do have one student who said that they would be interested in asking a question to the panel. Bethany, if you're willing, would you like to ask your question?
Oh, Bethany, I think you're muted.
There she is. Awesome.
So I think my question has mainly been answered by a couple of you already. It was about what our environmental justice leaders in Minnesota specifically are doing for Indigenous tribes. But if you have anything to add, I'd like to hear it.
You may have heard that there were 12 of us that were on the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's Environmental Justice Advisory Group. We all resigned in block because of the Pollution Control Agency Commissioner's decision to grant permits, water permits, to Enbridge Line 3. And those letters of resignation and all the attendant media are available online if you're interested in pursuing that forward.
We talked about that actually in class on Monday. We had them read an article about that, and pretty disappointing, the outcome, but I was really pleased to see that you guys took a stand. I think that's really important.
And if I could add to a reply for Bethany's question, over the issue of protecting Monoman wild rice, I have seen a remarkable transition in the last several years on all Minnesota tribes and tribal leaders speaking with a unified voice. Coming into this administration with Governor Walz and the Lieutenant Governor being an Anishinaabe woman, we had a lot of hope that there would be a renewed focus and connection to state government at the highest levels. And I would say that there have been some baby steps in progress with regards to all of the state agencies establishing tribal liaisons who are actually tribal members. And some of them working actually pretty hard to keep the lines of communication open. But when it comes to the issue of protecting wild rice and exercising water quality authorities, the state exercising its regulatory authority, they have simply fallen down on that job. And I am not seeing any even incremental progress in the right direction. And it's at the point now where tribal leaders are in formal consultation with state leaders, with the commissioners, with the governor's office, and laying it out on the line and saying, you are not doing your job. We are trying to protect this invaluable shared resource, and you are not doing your job at upholding the law. And I have to tell you how discouraging it is to see that despite a so-called empathetic state government at this point who says that they're interested in better tribal relations, we are not seeing evidence of that playing out in actions. And that is really, really discouraging.
Yeah, it is discouraging. And I hope that improves. And, you know, if you can give us any resources that the students can help to amplify your voices, with the state legislature, please share those with us. I know we're kind of running short on time. It's 10:50. I would like to ask the panelists to just go around one last time, if people have a few last minutes to share what they find, what inspires them most about this work. Nancy.
The community that I work for and the relationships that I have formed with not only the Fond du Lac tribal community, but with my colleagues and peers around the state, around the nation, who are trying to elevate tribal values, which I think would underpin a much more sustainable society.
Thank you. Leah Foushee.
Oh, well, one of the things that I didn't even talk about was what I do to keep my sanity. And that's collaborating with indigenous nations to replant wild fruit. And we've done several projects, including the Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, which Nancy Schultz was engaged in, at least on some level, and one at Gran Portage, and we just finished 3 collaborating with Shirley Nordrum to install 3 locations at Red Lake, White Earth, and Leech Lake. So that's what puts a smile on my face when I see the smile on the tribal members' faces, and it's great. Nothing
Thank you.
Nothing like blueberries.
Yeah, absolutely. Getting back to the earth. Thank you. Dr. Katre.
Sure. For me, I see every opportunity is, every problem is an opportunity for a solution and for innovation. And I think that inspires me. Also, the number of grassroots sort of innovation that's happening, I think that serves as inspiration, saying that there is possibility here of doing something and making a difference. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Dr. K.
Yeah, what's inspiring me right now is kind of the inverse of Bethany's question, which was about what can EJ leaders do for Indigenous peoples. And actually the reality in Minnesota is that what's been happening for decades and certainly is happening right now is that it's Indigenous leaders who are leading the way to make an environmentally just society with clean air and clean water and sustainable lifeways for all Minnesotans. And so what's inspiring me right now is the people putting their bodies on the line this week, today, Indigenous people, to try to make that happen for everyone, including those who, while they politically may not want it, will nonetheless benefit from the clean air and the clean water and the more sustainable Minnesota.
Great, thank you. And
yeah, what's inspiring me are the amount of individuals and groups in this movement and outside of it that are demanding change on their community levels, and they're achieving it in some cases. In some cases, it's still a long journey, but they're continuing to fight and persevere. And that's what's giving me hope for the future right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. John, would you like to say a few words, last words?
I just want to thank everybody for coming and our fabulous moderators and panelists. I think it was a great discussion with a lot of great perspectives. And yeah, I'm glad we could come together this morning to talk about these important issues. So thank you.
Thank you very much to the panelists. That was just wonderful. We really learned a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Have a great day.